During World War II, Japan launched over 9,000 weapons across the Pacific Ocean that traveled over 5,000 miles to reach American soil, and they did it using nothing more than paper, glue, and the power of the wind? This sounds like something out of a science fiction novel, but it's absolutely true. Welcome to the bizarre and terrifying story of the Japanese Fugo balloon bombs, one of the most ingenious yet ultimately futile weapons programs of the Second World War. Between 1944 and 1945, Japan released thousands of hydrogen-filled balloons carrying bombs into the jet stream, hoping they would drift across the Pacific and rain destruction on America and Canada. It was the world's first intercontinental weapon system, predating ICBMs by more than a decade. These floating harbingers of death were made by schoolgirls in factories using traditional materials, yet they represented cutting-edge military technology. And while most Americans have never heard of them, these balloon bombs successfully reached North America, caused casualties, sparked forest fires, and created a military mystery that baffled authorities for months. To understand why Japan would devise such an unconventional weapon, we need to understand the desperate situation they faced by late 1944. The war was going catastrophically badly for the Japanese Empire. American forces were island-hopping their way closer to the Japanese home islands. The Imperial Japanese Navy had been decimated at battles like Midway and the Philippine Sea. American submarines were strangling Japan's supply lines, and B-29 Superfortress bombers were beginning to appear in the skies over Japan. Japan's industrial capacity was a fraction of America's. They couldn't match American production of ships, planes, or conventional weapons. American factories were churning out thousands of aircraft while Japanese production was faltering due to lack of materials and bombing raids. The Japanese military leadership was desperate for any weapon that could strike back at the American mainland, boost morale at home, and possibly force the Americans to divert resources to homeland defense. The idea of attacking America's forests and cities had psychological appeal beyond the physical damage. If Japan could prove they could reach the American mainland, perhaps it would shake American resolve. Perhaps Americans, seeing their own country under attack, would pressure their government to negotiate peace. At minimum, it might force the United States to divert planes, soldiers, and resources away from the Pacific offensive to protect the homeland. The Fugo project, as it was called, relied on a natural phenomenon that Japanese scientists had been studying since the 1920s. The jet stream. High-altitude winds traveling west to east across the Pacific at speeds reaching 200 miles per hour. Japanese meteorologist Weisaburo Oishi had discovered these powerful winds decades earlier, though his work went largely unnoticed by the Western scientific community until after the war. The Japanese realized that if they could create balloons capable of reaching these high-altitude winds, they could ride them all the way to North America. It was brilliant in its simplicity, but executing it required solving numerous technical challenges. The balloons themselves were marvels of low-tech engineering. They measured 33 feet in diameter when fully inflated and were constructed from washi, traditional Japanese paper made from mulberry bushes. But this wasn't ordinary paper. The washi was specially processed and laminated in multiple layers with a paste made from konnyaku, a starchy root vegetable. This created a material that was surprisingly strong, lightweight, and capable of holding hydrogen gas. The construction process was meticulous. The paper was cut into panels using templates. Then the panels were glued together by hand. The quality control was intense because a single weak seam could mean the balloon would fail. Much of this work was done by teenage schoolgirls working in secret factories, including sumo wrestling halls and theaters that had been converted to production facilities. These young women had no idea what they were building or where it would go. They only knew their work was vital to Japan's war effort. Each balloon was designed to carry a payload of approximately 1,000 pounds, including bombs and an ingenious automatic altitude control system. This system was crucial because the balloon needed to maintain its altitude for the 3 to 4 days it would take to cross the Pacific. As night fell and the hydrogen cooled and contracted, the balloon would descend. As day came and the sun warmed the gas, it would rise. These altitude fluctuations would eventually doom the balloon. To solve this problem, the Japanese engineers created an automatic ballast system. Sandbags hung from the balloon in a ring, connected to an altimeter. When the balloon dropped below 30,000 feet, the altimeter would trigger a mechanism that would automatically release 2 sandbags, causing the balloon to rise again. This system could operate through several day-night cycles. When all the sandbags were gone, the balloon was programmed to release its bombs and self-destruct. The bomb payload typically consisted of one 33-pound anti-personnel bomb and 4 11-pound incendiary devices. The incendiaries were designed to start forest fires in the vast wilderness areas of the Pacific Northwest and Western Canada. The Japanese hoped that massive forest fires would tie up American resources, damage the timber industry vital to the war effort, and spread terror among the civilian population. Production began in earnest in the summer of 1944, and the first balloons were launched in November of that year from sites along Japan's eastern coast. The launch sites were positioned to take maximum advantage of the jet stream's seasonal patterns, which were strongest during winter months. The launch process was carefully orchestrated. Balloons were inflated with hydrogen gas generated on site. Teams would wait for favorable weather conditions, then release the balloons into the sky. They would watch as the balloons ascended and disappeared into the clouds, heading east toward an enemy they would never see, carrying weapons that would detonate on a timer without any human direction. Between November 1944 and April 1945, Japan launched approximately 9,000 of these balloon bombs. It was one of the largest launches of aerial weapons in history up to that point. The balloons departed from Japan with no guidance system, no ability to change course, and no way for their creators to know whether they succeeded or failed. It was warfare by probability. If even a small percentage reached America and caused damage, the program might be considered worthwhile. The balloons started arriving in North America in November 1944, though the exact date of the first landing remains unclear. What is known is that on November 4, 1944, the U.S. Navy ship Daisy Gray spotted a balloon descending into the ocean off San Pedro, California. They recovered it, and military intelligence was baffled. Over the following months, balloon sightings and discoveries became increasingly common across the western United States and Canada. Balloons and their components were found in Alaska, Washington, Oregon, California, Montana, Idaho, Nevada, Arizona, Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, Texas, Kansas, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota, Michigan, and even as far east as Iowa. In Canada, discoveries were made in British Columbia, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and the Northwest Territories. One balloon even made it all the way to Mexico. Initially, American and Canadian military authorities had no idea what these objects were. Some thought they might be Japanese rescue packages dropped for downed airmen or escaped prisoners of war. Others speculated they could be meteorological instruments. The idea that they were weapons launched from Japan seemed almost impossible. How could paper balloons travel 5,000 miles across the Pacific Ocean? The mystery deepened as military intelligence began examining the recovered balloons and their components. The balloons carried no identification, and the Japanese had been careful to remove any markings that might indicate their origin. However, the balloons themselves provided clues. The washi paper was distinctly Japanese in origin. The design of the bombs was consistent with known Japanese munitions, and the presence of sand in the ballast bags would prove to be a crucial piece of evidence. American scientists and geologists began examining the sand from the ballast bags under microscopes. Different beaches around the world have distinctive sand compositions based on their geology. By analyzing the mineral content and characteristics of the sand grains, geologists hope to determine where the balloons originated. The sand contained unique microscopic organisms called diatoms, along with specific mineral compositions that didn't match anything found in North America. After comparing samples with sand from beaches around the Pacific, researchers identified the source: beaches along Japan's eastern coast. This confirmed that the balloons were indeed being launched from Japan. But how were they getting to America? Meteorologists were brought in to explain. They confirmed that the jet stream could indeed carry objects from Japan to North America, and they began to understand the full scope of what Japan was attempting. This was the world's first intercontinental weapon system, and it was being executed with paper and string. Once American authorities understood what was happening, they faced a difficult decision. Should they inform the public about the balloon bombs, or keep it secret? They chose secrecy, implementing one of the most successful censorship campaigns of World War II. The logic was sound. The balloons were only a threat if they caused widespread panic or if Japan knew they were succeeding. If the American media reported on balloon bombs landing and causing fires, it would give Japan valuable intelligence about the program's success rate and might encourage them to expand it. Additionally, widespread knowledge of the balloons could cause panic among civilians in Western states. The Office of Censorship reached out to newspapers, radio stations, and newsreel companies across the United States and Canada, asking them voluntarily to suppress all information about the balloon bombs. Remarkably, the media complied. Despite hundreds of balloon sightings and discoveries, virtually nothing appeared in public media. A few small local newspapers ran brief stories, but these were quickly suppressed. This censorship may have saved lives and definitely frustrated Japanese intelligence. After launching 9,000 balloons, Japan had no reliable way to assess the program's success. They monitored American radio broadcasts and newspapers for any mention of attacks, fires, or mysterious explosions, but heard almost nothing. The silence convinced Japanese military leaders that the program was largely failing, and they discontinued it in April 1945. The censorship campaign was tragically tested on May 5, 1945, when the only fatal balloon bomb incident occurred. Reverend Archie Mitchell and his pregnant wife Elsie, along with 5 Sunday school children from their church, went on a fishing trip near Bly, Oregon. While Reverend Mitchell was parking the car, Elsie and the children wandered into the woods. They found something curious on the ground, a large deflated object they didn't recognize. When they tried to move it, it exploded. Elsie Mitchell and all 5 children were killed instantly. Dick Patsk, age 14, his sister Joan Patsk, age 13, Edward Engen, age 13, Jay Gifford, age 13, and Sherman Shoemaker, age 11. These 6 people remain the only combat casualties from enemy action on the American mainland during World War II. The tragedy could have been avoided if the public had been warned about the balloons. The Mitchells and the children had no idea that the strange object was dangerous. After this incident, authorities reconsidered their position and began a limited public information campaign, warning people in Western states not to touch any unusual objects they found in the wilderness. But they still didn't reveal the full extent of the balloon bomb campaign or its Japanese origin. From a military standpoint, the Fugo balloon bomb program was largely a failure. Out of 9,000 balloons launched, only about 300 are confirmed to have reached North America, though the actual number was probably higher since many likely landed in remote wilderness areas and were never found. The damage caused was minimal: a few forest fires that were quickly contained, some damaged power lines, and the 6 tragic deaths in Oregon. However, the program represented a significant technical achievement and foreshadowed future developments in warfare. The balloon bombs were the world's first intercontinental weapon delivery system, predating ICBMs by more than a decade. They demonstrated that it was possible to attack an enemy across vast oceanic distances without aircraft or ships. The altitude control system, though simple by today's standards, was remarkably sophisticated for its time. The ability to maintain a balloon at high altitude for several days while crossing an ocean represented genuine innovation in aeronautical engineering. After the war, American military researchers studied the recovered balloon bombs extensively. The information contributed to the development of high-altitude reconnaissance balloons during the Cold War, including Project Mogul and other classified programs. The concept of using weather patterns for military purposes would continue to fascinate military planners for decades. Even today, balloon bombs continue to be discovered. Because so many balloons landed in remote wilderness areas, they lay undisturbed for decades. As hikers, hunters, and forestry workers venture into increasingly remote areas, they occasionally stumble upon the remnants of these 80-year-old weapons. This creates an ongoing safety concern. The bombs were designed to remain stable until triggered, and some of the triggering mechanisms may still be functional after all these years. Military explosive ordnance disposal teams are still called out periodically to deal with discovered balloon bomb components. The devices are treated with extreme caution because their condition after decades of exposure to the elements is uncertain. In 2014, a balloon bomb was discovered in British Columbia by workers building a transmission line. In 2019, a bomb was found during construction work near Los Angeles. These discoveries remind us that the legacy of World War II continues to surface, quite literally, in unexpected places. The Fugo program represents a unique moment in military history where desperation, innovation, and the natural world intersected. It showed how a technologically inferior power could attempt to use asymmetric warfare, attacking an enemy's weakness rather than confronting their strength directly. Japan couldn't match American industrial might or air power, so they tried to harness the wind itself as a weapon. The program also demonstrates the psychological dimension of warfare. The balloon bombs did minimal physical damage, but the potential for panic and the diversion of resources was real. Had the censorship campaign failed and public awareness spread, the psychological impact could have been significant. From a historical perspective, the balloon bombs remind us of the extraordinary measures nations will take during total war. The image of teenage schoolgirls in converted theaters, carefully gluing together paper panels for weapons they didn't understand, while American censors suppressed information to deny the enemy intelligence, while Canadian foresters watched the skies for floating bombs, it's a story that sounds almost surreal. The Japanese Fugo balloon bomb program was one of World War II's most unusual weapon systems. 9,000 paper balloons, launched from Japan's shores, riding the jet stream across the Pacific, carrying bombs to an enemy continent 5,000 miles away. It was ingenious and desperate, low-tech and cutting-edge, ambitious and ultimately ineffective. The program killed 6 innocent people in an Oregon forest, a tragedy that might have been prevented with better public awareness. It sparked forest fires, damaged infrastructure, and created a genuine mystery for American military intelligence. But it failed in its broader goals of causing mass destruction, creating panic, or forcing America to divert significant resources. Yet the story deserves to be remembered. It shows the extraordinary lengths nations will go to during wartime, the power of censorship and information control, and the unintended consequences of weapons designed without precise targeting. The Fugo program was the world's first intercontinental weapon system, a precursor to technologies that would define the Cold War and beyond. Today, the balloon bombs exist mainly in museums and in the memories of those who lived through that period. They're a footnote in most World War II histories, overshadowed by larger campaigns and more destructive weapons. But they represent a unique moment when Japan tried to turn the very atmosphere into a weapon, sending thousands of floating bombs across the greatest ocean on Earth, hoping that wind and chance would carry them to their target. The next time you hear about the jet stream in a weather forecast, remember, there was a time when that invisible river of air was a highway for weapons, when paper balloons carried death across the Pacific, and when one of history's most ambitious long-range attacks was executed with materials that could be found in any Japanese schoolroom. The story of the Fugo balloon bombs reminds us that innovation in warfare comes in many forms, and that even in humanity's darkest hours, the ingenuity of the human mind, for better or worse, knows no bounds.